Okay, welcome everyone. As we are co-sponsored in our journey through this delicious Masechta by Shelley Zeitlin for my refuah, Moshe Meir ben Estefadel, and in the schus of his children, Eli, Orit, and Ora, by Eddie Chazan, for Shalema for Yedidia, Ben Penina, Shoshana Bas Penina, and Simone Bas Rachel, and anonymously Lila Nishmas David Ben Chaim, Schus Eliyah Moshe Mechai Sarah, Yaakov Ben Bas Yaleya, and in the Schus of Avraham Ben Yom Benish Ben Malk Yehudis and family. And we are holding towards the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis, at the two dots, 3 lines from the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis. Mishum Rabbi Kiva Amru, Rabbi Kiva says that Eidim Zaymimim don't pay al pi atzman. In other words, Rabbi Kiva learns that it's a knas, and you don't pay a knas with your own admission. So if they admit that they were lying, they don't pay the knas. So says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Kiva, what's the reason of Rabbi Kiva? Kasavar knasahu, he holds that Eidim Zamin is a penalty. The knas ein mishalem al pi atzmai. Amar Rabba, Teda, you should know that it's a penalty and not compensatory. Shari lo yasu ma'isa, they didn't do anything. At the end, they didn't steal anything, and they didn't cause anybody to get killed, because remember, we only say if it's kasher zomam, not if it's kasher asa. So they didn't do anything, and yet v'nerogin, they are killed sometimes if they plan to kill somebody, or mishalmim, and they pay. Amar Rav Nachman, Teda. Now, Rav Nachman seems to say the same thing. Don't get nervous. The Gemara is going to point this out. Rav Nachman, Teda, you should know, Shahare Mamon Biyad Bailim, the money is still in the hands of the owner. In other words, we didn't take it away from the Eidim. The money is still in the hands of the Eidim, or Mishalman. So the Gemara says, well, isn't that just what we just said? Says that they didn't accomplish anything. They didn't take it away from the from the person because they confessed. So excuse me, they didn't take it away from the person, and yet we give them the penalty. So that shows that it's not compensatory. But Hainu de Rabbah, that's the same thing that Rabbah just said. Says, well, you're right. Ema v'chein amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says the same thing. Let's try to get people muted over here. Okay, now. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Eid Zaymim mishalem lefi chelka. An Eid Zaymim pays his portion. Now we're going to have to get some dastardly people over here because Marshall and Barry didn't come in yet. So let's see. Let me look at the scruffy individuals over here. Mark and Yaakov. Those are two viable troublemakers, right? So if Mark and Yaakov said that Yisrael did something, and Mark, now they wanted to be Mechuyev Yisrael. They wanted to be Mechuyev Yisrael $1 million, and Mark, confesses. Says the Gemara. So what the Gemara is saying now is that he's Mishalem Lefi Chelka. He pays his portion, $500,000. Says the Gemara. Mark, $500,000, easy come, easy go, right? It's for the few days that you missed in the shir. The $500,000 that you made during those days, you got to give it back, right? So says the Gemara, We got to get people muted here. Okay. Says the Gemara, "My mishalim lefi chelka." What does it mean? He pays according to his portion. Does it mean that they split it? In other words, we don't say that Yaakov pays $1 million and Mark pays $1 million, but they split it. If that's what it means, that each one pays half of what they wanted to take away from Rabbi Yisrael. Tanina, this we already learned. Mishalshim b'mammon, we divide the money. V'hei mishalshim b'malchus, but we don't divide Makos. That means if they wanted to give Rabbi Yisrael Makos, then we don't say that Mark gets a half a Malchus and Yaakov gets a half a Malchus, but they each get a full Malchus. So we already learned that we divide the money. Ella says the Gemara, it must be Kigayndi Tozim Chad Minay, that Mark and Yaakov said that Rabbi Yisrael did something. Rabbi Yisrael did something on Rosh Chodesh Nisan in Lakewood. And okay, Dov, I'm muting you a second time. Try to make sure you kept muted. Okay, I muted you.
Can you tell me where we're holding up?
Yes, we're holding in Makos, and we're holding on Gimel Amud Aleph, and we're holding 6 lines from the top. So, Ella, what it means is that Mark and now Yaakov gets off the hook because our criminal expert Barry is here. Mark and Barry say that Yisrael stole $1 million on Rosh Chodesh Nisan in Lakewood. Ela k'goyndi toizim chad minay. Barry is still in the clear, but Mark, we heard he was on a cruise to the Bahamas. So Mark is on the hot seat. The Mishalem Palgadi Day, that he has to pay $500,000, says Gemara, Umi Mishalem. If we only make half of the witness, Zaymimim, does that half have to pay? V'tanya ein eid Zaymim Mishalem Mammon. They don't have to pay money, Ad Sheyazum Shneim, until we find both Mark and Barry crooked. If we only find Mark crooked, he doesn't have to pay half. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Ba'omer Eidus Sheker Ha'adati, where Mark says, I cannot tell a lie. It's not true what I said. So the Gemara says, Kol Kamine, is he believed? You can't just back out on a testimony. Kevin Shehigid Shuveina Chayzer Magid, as the Gemara says, Kevin Shehigid Shuveina Chayzer Magid. Once you give your testimony, you have no permission to rewrite it. You can't rewrite your testimony. Ella says the Gemara, here's the case. Mark and Barry testified that Rabbi Yisrael stole $1 million. Ba'omer Hey Adnu, where Mark comes now and says, Hey Adnu, we gave testimony. V'huzamnu bebezdin ploini. We gave testimony, and we were declared zaymimim in this and this bezdin. So in this case, he's not rewriting his testimony. He's admitting that they were found to be Eidim Zaymimim in a certain court. Says the Gemara, but if all that we have is Mark say so for this, but we said Eidim Zaymimim is not Mishalem al Piatzmai. Says Gemara, Commander like Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Kiva Amar Af Ein Mishalem al Piatzma. He doesn't pay if it's by his own admission. Ela ba'omer Hey Adnu v'uzmanu bebezdin. He says we testified, and we were found to be Eidim Zaymimim in Bezdin, and bebezdin Pliny in the Bezdin in the town of Shnipashak. V'chayvinu mammon. and they required us to pay. Oh, so Mark is saying that there was already a chiyuv mammon. So kedai tekamina. I might think that kevan de lechavrei matzi mechayivle. He can't be mechayiv Barry because there's no other witnesses, so he can't be mechayiv Barry. And since Edom Zaymim usually only chayiv if they're a couple, here I might think Iyunami loy mechayiv. I might think he's also not chayiv. Kamash Malan that he is, because he admits that both of them were already found to be guilty. So although we can't be mechayiv Barry because Mark is not believed about Barry, but he's believed about himself. He does baldin kameya Edom dami. So here is a case where Mark thought that it would be an easy night, and he's already 500 grand down. What could you do? Easy come, easy go. Now, the next case is Me'iden anu es ish ploini. Mark and Barry give testimony about Chatzkel, shegirish es ishtay, that Chatzkel was a deadbeat guy. He divorced his wife, and he didn't give her a ksuva. So they wanted to be mechayiv Chatzkel ksuva. So you'll say, well, if it's a straight out ksuva of a virgin, that's 200 zuz. So Mark and Barry wanted to be mechayiv Chatzkel to pay 200 zuz. Now we find out it's not true, that he didn't divorce his wife. So it would seem to be that they have to give Chatzkel 200 zuz, but not so fast. Not so fast. Because Chatzkel might end up divorcing his wife. He might end up predeceasing his wife. And then he would have to pay the money. So it's not for sure that they're taking away 200 zuz from Chatzkel, because he might have to pay it eventually anyway. But today or tomorrow, Sefer Litein Aksuva. He might indeed have to give a ksuva. If he divorces her or he dies, he predeceases her. So says the Gemara, we have to assess what's the value of the ksuva right now. What's the value of the ksuva right now? How much? Baruch Ian, he's a speculator. He likes to speculate. How much would he pay Chatzkel for the ksuva? He says, you know what? I'll give you 50 cents on the dollar, and I'll buy the ksuva with you, banking that your wife will predecease you, and therefore the ksuva will be yours. So that's what the ksuva is worth now. So the Gemara says, "I'm the kama adam writes in litem b'ksuvasa shelzu." How much would he pay for this ksuva? She'imnis amla oinis garsha. If she gets widowed or divorced, so then he loses it. But v'meisa, if she dies, if she predeceases him, yirshana bala. Now here the Gemara tells us that there's two different ways to evaluate this. One way is the straightforward way, and that is, what's the value of the ksuva now to Chatzkel? The value of the ksuva now to Chatzkel that Barry and Mark wanted to illegally take away from him is what money he could have got now for it, from a speculator, from Baruch Ian. And that money is what Mark and Barry have to pay. That's one way to evaluate it. The other way to evaluate it is how much money would the wife get? And deduct that amount of money from the ksuva. In other words, the wife could also sell the ksuva, because Baruch might give her money as a speculator. She could sell and say, you want to buy my ksuva that if I get divorced, knowing Chatzkel, if I get divorced or he dies, he predeceases me, then I get it. and then we take that amount, deduct it from the face value of the ksuva, and that's what Mark and Barry have to pay. So those are the two ways to calculate it. Ketzad shaman, Amar of Chisda Babal. The straightforward way is how much would a speculator pay to the husband for the ksuva now. Rav Nasan bar Aishia Amar Be'isha. We figure out how much a speculator would pay for the wife. Then we deduct that amount from the face value, and that's what Mark and Barry have to pay. Rav Papa, and Rav Papa adds, just to make it clear, Be'isha u b'ksuvas, how much you pay to a woman for that which is in the ksuva. Because the ksuva represents different things. But because there's also nichsei maluk, property that a wife brings into the marriage, but it's not recorded in the ksuva. That Mark and Barry are not expected to know about to make them liable for that. But that which is recorded in the ksuva, the base amount, the 200 or the 100 if she's not a virgin, wasn't a virgin, and the taisvus, anything added, and the nichsei tzayin barzel, the money that she brought in and was recorded in the ksuva, we calculate all that, because all that Mark and Barry would know about, because that's written in the ksuva and has a curl. Now, the next case, Me'idin anu b'ish plini. Mark is busy tonight. Mark and Barry. Me'idin anu b'ish plini. Get on the phone and call Marshall. Tell him you need him. Me'idin anu b'ish plini shu chayev l'chaveroi elev zuz. We testify that Shimon owes Dr. Black 1,000 zuz. Almanas litten loy mikan v'ad shloishim yoyim. And Mark and Barry testify that the note is due in a month. Now Shimon admits that he owes Dr. Black the 1,000, but he says it's due in 10 years. A very big difference. You know, a businessman like Shimon knows that, money is worth to hold, right? So Mark and Barry say that Shimon has to pay in a month. And Shimon says that I have the use of the money for 10 years. We find out that Mark and Barry, of course, as is their reputation, they were off skiing in the Alps. They couldn't have seen it. So how do we calculate the hazama? They weren't taking away $1,000 from Shimon, because Shimon admits that he owed the money also. We find out what a speculator like Baruch will pay to have money for 10 years versus 30 days. And the amount of money you would pay to have the use of the money, that's what Mark and Barry were trying to take away from Shimon, and that's what they have to pay. So this opens up an interesting question. We know that Shemitah relinquishes a debt. That when Shemitah comes, it wipes out all debts. What if the debt wasn't due yet? Does it wipe out the debt? In other words, let's say I owe money to Shelley in 10 years. And in 7 years, Shemitah comes. Does it wipe out the debt? Or because the debt isn't due, it doesn't wipe out the debt? So, Amr Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul, Amalves Chaver Eser Shanim, if Shelley gives me a loan for 10 years, Shvias Misham Tosai, Shemitah, when it comes 7 years, it erases the debt. It dissolves the debt. And even though, normally the Torah says that there's a lav, lo yigos. You cannot press for the payment of a debt. There is no pressing, because when it came to 7 years, the Shemitah, the debt isn't due yet. Since it eventually will come to a pressure, so it's his opinion that the debt is released. Well, if that's the case, so then when Mark and Barry say that Shimon had to pay it in 30 days, and he said in 10 years, he wouldn't have had to pay it at all. Because during the 10 years, there'll be a Shemitah that will wipe it out. How much would a person give? The difference between 30 days. But if you say, that Shvius Misham Tasai, that Shemitah is Mishametit, well, then it's a difference between owing the money or not. They have to pay the whole thing. Because by saying that Shimon has to pay it in 30 days, he'd be liable to pay. But if it's 10 years, he's not going to be liable to pay because the Shemitah will be Mishametit. Says the Gemara, no, what do you think? You think somebody gives a loan for 10 years and is going to allow it to be erased? There's ways to protect yourself, even without a prusbel. Either you could give the shtar to Bezdin, and once the shtar is in the hands of Bezdin, Shemitah doesn't release it because there's no lo yigais, there's no pressing because it's already in the hands of Bezdin. Or you have a mashkin, collateral, and since you have collateral, there's no lo yigais. Amarav b'mayaskinan b'mal v'ala mashkin, where Shimon took the loan with collateral, or b'maisa shtarais of the Bezdin, or where Dr. Black made sure to give his documents to the court. In those cases, Shemitah is not Mishamet. The Tanan, Amal Vala Mashkin, if you give a loan with a Mashkin, so there you don't have to press because you're already holding the collateral, or Vamaisish Tarais of the Bezdin, or you hand over the documents to Bezdin, Ein Mashmitin. Now, Ikadamre, some say the same discussion, but they start off by saying, if you give a loan for 10 years, ain't Shvius Misham Tasei. Shemitah doesn't relinquish, which makes, I think, more sense. Because at the time of the 7 years, the loan wasn't due yet. Even though eventually there will be pressing, Hashdamiyah in the 7th year, like Karina Bey Lo Yigai, since the loan isn't due yet, so there was no issue of pressing, so therefore Shemitah doesn't relinquish it. So the Gemara now wants to bring a raya from our Mishnah. Rav Kana Afanan Nami Tanina Oimdin Kama right Salitain. We evaluate how much a person would give v'yu elef zuz biyadei bein litain mekanvat shleishim yom, a difference between 30 days bein litain mekanvat eser shanim. But if you would learn that a loan given 10 months, Shemitah is relinquished, so then it's the difference of whether the loan is going to be paid or not. The Edim Zaymimim that said that it was due in 30 days versus 10 years would be mechayiv to pay the difference of the whole loan. If you say that 10 years Shemitah would release it and make it not payable. Says the Gemara, no, it's no raya from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah could be talking about a case where Shemitah is not in the equation. Where the loan was given with collateral, or the shtars were handed over to Bezdin, where there's no Shemitah doesn't relinquish it. Shemitah does not relinquish. Now, here's an interesting thing. We have a klal throughout Shas that that if you stipulate against what it says in the Torah, the Tanai is batal. So an example of that, if somebody is Mekadesh, a woman, and he stipulates on the condition that he doesn't have any sexual responsibilities, he doesn't have any money responsibilities. So we say that the stipulation is void, because the Torah says, Sheirek Susa Bainasa Lo Yigra, and you can't stipulate against what it says in the Torah. So now the Gemara takes us into this discussion as follows. Before we start, let me be a mensch and welcome in Rabbi Yaakov Warman, Irving Fishman, Chaim Lerner, Saba, Menachem Yimansky, Berish Gesseman, Baruch Ian, Aaron Swade, Shimon Klein, Mark Frankel, Dr. Block, Nachman Chapler, Mel Zachter, Ruvain Pollack, Dov Solkowitz, Barry Cement, Jack Silverman, Mo Kushner, Dr. Udell, Yisrael Fisher, Shmuel Eisenberg, Shelley Zeitlin, Ilya Shutman, Moshe Lehman, Yitzi Muller, Avram Rezepkowitz, David Helfgott, Chaim Kramer, and Michal Avram, Ruvain Shannon. So, says the Gemara, V'amr Yehuda Shmuel, we are holding on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, a little bit above midway down the Amid. V'amr Yehuda Shmuel, ha'omer lechaverai, if a person says, here's a loan, al manash sheloi tashamteini shvius, I don't want any of this nonsense that Shemitah will relinquish the loan. So says Shmuel, shvius mishamnetes, Shemitah is mishamet, Shemitah does relinquish it. Says the Gemara, so it seems to be that Shmuel holds what we just said. If you stipulate against what's written in the Torah, you stipulated against what's written in the Torah. So as in the case where the man says, I'm being mekadesh you on the condition that I have no sexual responsibilities, he does have it, because the Torah says, Sherik Susa Vainasa Lo Yigra, Ainasa is sexual responsibilities, and if you if you stipulate against what it says in the Torah, Tanabata. Says, but that's not Shmuel's opinion. For Itmar, we know, as we learned above Metzia, that any overcharge of more than a sixth is Aina'ah. The Torah says, and we say Bittul Mekah. Now here, Mark is a shopster. He does business. Mark is a shopster, and he does business with his. He does business with Shelley, and he says, you can't have any claim of overcharge. So Rav Amar Shelley can say overcharge, because Rav is being because Mark is masna mashikas b'teira, masna mashikas b'teira tonight battle. But Shmuel Amar ain't lo yayla. Shmuel says that Mark is within his rights. So it seems to me that Shmuel doesn't hold of masna mashikas b'teira tonight battle. So how come he holds that way by Shemitah? He said if Mark says here's a loan on the condition that Shemitah shouldn't be Meshamet, we said Shemitah is Meshamet. So what's the difference between Shemitah and Ainah? So here the Gemara takes out the Talmudic surgical scalpel. And the Gemara says that you could waive your rights of Torah. So Shelley could say, you know what? I'm waiving my rights. The Torah gives me a right to claim a mekach tois more than a six. I'm waiving that right. That you could do. But to say there is no such thing as Ainah, that you can't do. So yeah, you have to be, when Mark talks, get a lawyer. Right? Get a lawyer. Says the Gemara, Itmar Allah Amarav Anan, L'didi Mefarsh Minei de Shmuel. To me, it was explained by Shmuel. Al Manash Ein Lecha Alai Oina. If Mark says to Shelley, on the condition that you don't have upon me a claim of Ainah. In other words, you're waiving your rights. That's legal. Al-Manasha ain't by Ainah. On the condition that there's no such thing as Ainah, that doesn't work. Hariyesh by Ainah, that's Masna Masha Kosa B'Tayr. The same thing by Shemitah. Hakanami, Al-Manasha loy tisham teini b'shviyas. If Mark says on the condition that my loan is not relinquished on Shemitah, in other words, you're waiving your Torah rights, ain't Shviyas Misham Tosik. That he could do. Al-Manashalei to Shamteni Shviyas, if he says on the condition that Shemitah doesn't relinquish, he's trying to uproot that which the Torah says, Shviyas Misham Tosik. Then Shemitah is Mishamet. So be very careful how you dot the I's and the T's when you do a deal with Mark. I'm telling you. You see BC, Bela Kinwood, you thought BC stands for before Common Era. It doesn't. It stands for Bela Kinwood. If you see BC, be very careful.
I thought it stood for Barry Cement. No? Okay.
Then be doubly careful. Now, what happens if I give a loan to Mark? When does he have to pay the money? So the Gemara says, Tana hamal ve'eskaveiroi stam. If I give him an unspecified loan, ein rashid l'toivei, I can't ask for the money back, pachas mishalishim yom, in less than 30 days. Now, at this point, the Gemara thinks that's only a milva b'shtar, where there's a document. Because we'll say nobody bothers writing up a document for less than 30 days. That's a loan recorded in a document. The cost of shtar, because nobody will take the trouble to record it in a shtar for less than 30 days. But if it's an oral loan, it could be asked back even before 30 days. However, that's not so. Amalei Rav, Hochi Amar Chavivi, so did my beloved uncle say. Rav's uncle was the great Rav Chia, called him Chavivi. Echad amal v'bishtar, whether it's a loan recorded in a document, ve'echad amal v'alpeh, or a loan, you can't ask it back for less than 30 days. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned likewise, hamal ve'eskaver stam, if you give a loan to a person without specifications, ein rashid l'toivei, I can't ask Mark back for the money, pachas mishloshim yom, echad amal v'bishtar, whether I give it to him recorded in a document, ve'echad amal v'alpeh. Amalei Shmuel l'Rav Masna, loy teisev akarech, don't sit down on your feet. You know, in those days they sat on the floor, so they would fold their feet underneath them and sit down on their feet. See, that's you don't realize the comfort I afford you, that I give you the share in the comfort of your own home. You know, it used to be that Mark drove to the share, but he got lazy in his old age. So the Gemara says, Amalei Shmuel Rav Masna, loy teisev akarech, don't sit down on your feet until you explain this dictum. How do the rabbis know? If you give a loan, if I give Mark a loan, I can't ask him for the money back till 30 days. And this is true with the recorded document. So the Gemara has a very interesting proof for this. Very, very interesting. Amalei dichsiv, korva shnas hasheva shnas hashmita. The 7th year, the year that relinquished, is coming near. Now that's redundant. It's rhetorical. The 7th year is the year of Shemitah. We know the 7th year is Shemitah. Why does it say Shnas HaShemitah? Because there's another Shemitah period that's not the 7-year period. Says the Gemara, let's see it inside. Says the Gemara, there's another period that relinquishes, that makes the loan terminate, that's different than 7 years. That if I give a loan to Mark, when is the time that that loan, so to speak, is terminated, that he has to pay up? A year. Because what you'll say, that's a shnas shmita. A year that causes it to be relinquished, causes it to need to be terminated. Now, but you didn't say a year, you said 30 days. She'ein rashi l'toivay b'pachas mishlo ve'ezeh zu amal v'eschaver stam she'ein rashi l'toivay b'pachas mishloishim yom. Now, how does a year become 30 days? The amamah shloishim yom b'shana chashiv shana. By Erla, the din is, we know that if Reuven plants a tree, the first 3 years he can't use the fruit. Now that we mentioned fruit trees, you should remember to make a bracha on a fruit tree. Right? In Nisan we make a bracha on the fruit trees. So the din is that if Reuven plants a tree 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, that's considered the first year. Because Shloishim Yom B'Shana is considered like a Shana. The Amarava Shloishim Yom B'Shana Chashav Shana. So 30 days is the Shnas HaShmita, and that's when the loan is terminated, that's when it could be collected. Now, we know that a lot of times, they say about Moshe Meir Weiss that he goes off on tangents. Do you ever hear somebody accuse me of that? They accuse me of that. I've been accused of that.
Of being garrulous.
I've been accused of that. But that's from the Gemara. Because the Gemara goes off on tangents and it talks about something that has nothing to do with Makos, nothing to do with our discussion, just because it's something with the same frame. Rabbi Yehuda says something in the name of Rav, and Rav Kahana asks a question. So this is another case. If you have a shirt that's ready, except that the hole wasn't made for the neck. Now, without a hole for the neck, you can't wear the shirt. Got to get the head through it, unless you're headless, Barry. But otherwise, you got to have it. So, if you make an opening for the neck on Shabbos, chayiv chatas. That's one of the 39 malachas. And if you did it b'shageg, you're chayiv a sin offering. Which 39 malacha is that? It's called makeh bepatish. You make the din is if you finish an item, you make the final hammer blow, you're chayiv. So here also, when you make the opening in the neck, you're finishing it as a keli, and you're chayiv. Says the Gemara, but I don't understand. It says that you're allowed to lop off the top of a cask to drink its wine. Aren't you making an opening? What's this different than lopping off the top of a cask of wine? In the case of the shirt, it was material that was it was made in material that you're opening. That's not true by the cask. By the cask, they stuck the top onto the cask, but it was already two pieces. So when you lop it off, you're not creating something new. Now, this is where we're stopping. The next sugya goes deep into tomorrow. So, first of all, I have to tell everybody there's a special time for tomorrow. Daf Yomi tomorrow night is 9:15, because tomorrow night is Bedika night. In Lakewood, the Zman to start Bedika is 8:14. So, I'm leaving an hour for Badika. I'm not leaving time to eat after Badika, that I'm not, because we can't have the daf too late. So make sure to take something before the Zman to eat. Anyway, people don't usually wait till so late to eat. They're not like me. I'll probably be eating breakfast around then. So the daf tomorrow is 9:15. Tomorrow morning, for those that need a siyum by Zoom, Shachris here is 7:30, so the siyum will be around 8:15. So if you want to hear the siyum that I'm going to make tomorrow morning, tune in around 8:15. And now we're going to have the Chumash here.